Hello, how are you? It's very important that the next time you go to the bathroom, you make it a habit to observe your stool. It can tell you a lot about your health. Many people feel embarrassed or disgusted by this, but they shouldn't because it's a sign your body gives that there may be a health problem happening or that your diet is unbalanced and that you should change it precisely to improve your health and quality of life. I'm going to tell you about it here, what you should observe and what are the signs your body gives that something is very wrong and when you should see a doctor. Stay until the end. You won't want to miss this. Before we start, tell me if you already have this habit. When you go to take care of your bodily needs, when you go to urinate or have a bowel movement, do you have the habit of looking at the toilet to see, what you actually produced? This is super important. Now tell me down below in the comments if you already do this or if you're going to start doing it. Because if you don't, you should start doing it today. I would love to see your comment. Remember to like the video. This is really important to me, and it shows YouTube that you trust my content and that you support the channel. We already know that stool is formed from food remnants, from what we eat, from what we ingest. Eventually, it will be processed, ingested, part of this food will be absorbed, and it will be excreted through our intestines. Besides that, we also have bacteria there and shed cells. So, all of this can interfere with intestinal transit, with the balance of our microbiota, which are the little organisms that live in our bodies in symbiosis with us. The functioning of the liver and the bile ducts can also have an effect. So, there are many aspects of our health and lifestyle that we can notice by observing our stool. When we see a change in our stool, we might be looking for a change in its shape, in its consistency, or even in its color. Let's talk a little more about that. The first thing I want to tell you is that scientifically, there is a scale that was created called the Bristol stool scale. This scale relates to the formation of stool and identifies 7 types of stool that have been determined to be the most common. And it has to do with the shape and consistency of the stool. Type 1 is hard little pellets, like what we call goat droppings. This indicates to us that you may be constipated. Type 2 is hard and lumpy stools. This happens when your intestinal transit is slow. So what does this tell us when we observe it? That you're not hydrating properly, that you're not consuming enough fiber, that you're not eating enough healthy fat to moisten these stools to make them softer. So if when you go to the bathroom, you look at the toilet and your stool looks like this, you already know that you need to improve these aspects of your diet. When you have type 3 and 4 stools, which are those smoother and softer sausage-like types, that's the healthiest and most normal pattern, let's say, that we aim to have every time we have a bowel movement. So, these type 3 and 4 stools are considered the most normal. Type 5 consists of softer, more pasty pieces, which indicate an acceleration of intestinal transit. This can be related to excessive consumption of vegetables, too much fat intake, or it could be associated with some kind of health problem. I'll talk more about this with you later. And type 6 and 7 are the mushy or diarrheal stools, which are more fluid, right? They're less formed. So these stools can even be liquid or very mushy, indicating diarrhea. And they can indicate inflammation, infection, or food intolerance. So it's important for us to pay attention to the consistency of our stools to check what's happening in our bodies. So, as I mentioned before, the ideal is for them to be between level 3 and 4. That is, for them to be brown. This color is very important, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Soft, and that you have, this is a very important point, a feeling of complete emptying after you have a bowel movement. You shouldn't leave the toilet feeling like your stool broke apart before you were able to finish your bowel movement. Like, I wanted to have a bigger bowel movement, I wanted to get rid of this, but I just can't. That's also a bad sign, okay? If you always have this sign, it's worth paying attention to. So, if your liver is working well, secreting bile, if your digestive process is going smoothly, if your gut bacteria are doing their job, then everything is functioning as it should, and your stool will have this color brown. It's natural brownish color. Now, there are different stool colors. For example, there are greenish stools, which happen when intestinal transit is very fast or when you consume a lot of leafy greens. This can even be beneficial in some cases. When stools appear yellowish, this can be a sign of excessive fat consumption, the presence of steatorrhea, difficulties with proper fat digestion, possible giardiasis, or underlying issues related to pancreatic function. So it's important for you to pay attention to this coloration. When stools are black, that's a very important point for us to pay attention to because it can indicate bleeding in the stomach or in the upper part of the intestine, because when the blood is fresh, it appears red in the stool, especially when the bleeding is closer to the rectum. But when the bleeding happens higher up in the intestine or in the stomach, this blood coagulates. So it comes out dark, really blackened. And this is a very important point. It's not that brown color, it's black. So, and this melena, these stools are sticky, they have a foul odor. So it's extremely important for you to pay attention to this when you're cleaning yourself as well. These reddish stools I mentioned to you can be related to bleeding, which is usually bleeding from the final portion of the intestine. And this can be related to hemorrhoids, anal fissures, but it can also be related to colon cancer. So, stools with blood, it's always important to keep an eye on that. These reddish stools can also be related to excessive consumption of beets, for example, or other very red foods. That's why even when someone is going to have a colonoscopy, doctors tell them not to eat anything red for 2 or 3 days before the exam, because the natural coloring from the food can remain and color the stool, which could be mistaken for blood. So, it's also worth evaluating your own diet. There are also very pale, almost white stools, which can be related to a lack of bile, which is the opposite of brown stools, and may be associated with bile duct obstruction and requires immediate medical evaluation. We know that lighter stools and darkened urine are classic signs of liver problems. So all of this should be evaluated in such cases. So, if you also notice a change in the thickness of your stool, for example, stools are normally cylindrical, right? Because the anal opening is round. Now, imagine your stool is coming out flat, like a ribbon. This could be a sign of some kind of obstruction in your intestine. A polyp, some type of cancer in its early or even more advanced stages, which you might not have any symptoms of. So, it could be hindering the passage of stool, and instead of coming out cylindrical, like a sausage as I mentioned, it comes out flattened. This is a classic sign of a problem for which you should urgently seek help. Regarding the issue of stool, whether it floats or sinks, and the relationship between that, is it true that stools that float are the ones that have a high fat content? Is it related to excessive fat in the diet? It could be, especially if it's associated with very foul-smelling, very loose stools that are hard to clean and very oily. Now, if a person consumes a lot of fiber, for example, or has a lot of intestinal gas, these stools also tend to float rather than sink. So it's not necessarily related to a health problem, but it's always another point for us to evaluate, especially when considered along with other factors based on the color and whether it's difficult to clean or not. To maintain hygiene, you can make a correlation with excess fat. So, what are the worst types of stool you could have? Certainly, it's the stools that have some kind of relation to the excretion of blood through the digestive tract. Black stools, because this shows you that the bleeding is coming from higher up. Red stools, which indicate lower gastrointestinal bleeding. And this flattening of the stool, these are more complicated stools from a clinical perspective. Now, if you always have those little pellet-like stools, like goat droppings, that could indicate chronic constipation. We know that in the medium and long term, this can cause problems for you, including hemorrhoids, anal fissures, and even excessive contact between bacteria or pathogens and the intestinal tract, which can increase the risk of cancer. We already know this. Studies have already proven this. So it's important that you look at your stool, that you pay attention to what your body produces. It's your body, it's part of you, and it could be related to a serious, important health problem. So remember next time you go to the bathroom to observe what your excrement looks like. I also have a video here on the channel talking about urine color because that's super important for your health as well. I'll leave that video down below in the description. I want to know if you already used to look at your stool, if you have the habit of observing your excrement, or if you're going to start paying attention to it now. This is super important. I would love to see your comment. Remember to like the video, that really helps me a lot, and share it with anyone who needs this information. A lot of people don't know this and need this information. So let's share and spread this chain of good. That's what I want here with the channel. See you next time. Bye.